About a month ago, I was on a multi-hour international flight and looking for a movie to pass the time, and that's why I saw Tara being recommended to me by the in-flight entertainment app. I had vaguely heard about this film. I heard that it had received a bunch of Oscar nominations, and I decided, hey, why not? Might as well give this one a try. So I sat back, hit play, and waited. And at the start of this film, we're treated to about 4 minutes of a black screen with on-screen credits rolling in. In the background, we hear a solo vocalist singing some kind of tribal folk song. At the time, I didn't really think much of it, figuring, okay, well, this is a film about music. The director's probably gonna try and clue me in to pay attention to the musical score later on in the film, and that's why he's showing me a black screen for a while. We then spend another 4 entire minutes in what I can only describe as a Lydia Tarr glazing session. Lydia Tarr is introduced as one of the premier conductors of her time, and we see the person interviewing Lydia read off an exhaustive list of her accolades and accomplishments, finishing off with how Lydia will be the first person to record all of Mahler's symphonies. If that's not eye-rolling enough, the dialogue of this interview is fairly technical and niche. Many figures are name-dropped, which the casual audience member would not be familiar with. So names like Marin Alsop, Joanne Filletta, Laurence Equibi, and Nathalie Stutzman, to name a few. The interviewer asked Lydia about how some people say that conductors are simply glorified timekeepers, and Lydia responds by talking about her personal role model, Leonard Bernstein, saying that he knew the music, Mahler especially, as well or better than anyone, and he would often play with the form. He'd do radical things like disregarding the tempo primo, or ending this phrase molto ritardando even though it had no such marking. Again, using phrases that the audience would have no understanding of. At this point, I'm getting the impression that this film is not trying to be accessible to the average audience member, and it just keeps going on and on. The next day, Lydia is sitting for lunch with her associate, and they're talking about firing one of her assistant conductors. Lydia remarks that he has certain fetishes, a certain nostalgia for pre-war Camus miniature scores, deadstock pencils he's seen Von Karajan hold in photographs, you know, that sort of thing. And I'm like, no, Lydia, I don't know that sort of thing. And this keeps happening, so the next day, Lydia gives a guest lecture at Juilliard, where she gets into a debate with the student conductor. The conversation itself is actually pretty interesting. They delve into a longer discussion about whether you can separate the art from the artist. But there's a moment when she asks another student what she thinks about the piece that the student conductor was conducting, and the student says that it has an incredible atonal tension, which Lydia scoffs at, saying that calling it that was intellectual masturbation. And I'm like, that's you! That's you, Lydia! I promptly then switched to a different movie, saying to myself, okay, something so heady and seemingly sophisticated is probably not the right film for a flight, and I'll give it another go later. So, fast forward about a month, and I decide to give this film another go, now in the comfort of my home. On the larger TV screen that I'm watching this on, as I watch these opening credits again, I notice something weird. Cate Blanchett, the actress who plays Lydia, isn't mentioned in these credits at all. In fact, we notice that it's all of the smaller roles in the film's production. The main actors aren't mentioned in these opening credits. And it's true that these roles are absolutely essential to making the film successful. Everyone has a role, but this film is displaying the less highlighted roles, and it got me thinking, if these were players in an orchestra, they might be considered the players in the background, or perhaps staff members who aren't on the stage at all. I then re-watched the interview scene, the conversation with her associate, and the lecture she gives to her students. And then we get to a scene later on where Lydia reflects on the interview she gave and calls herself garrulous. Another $10 word that basically means she's a yapper. She's a yapper talking about trivial things that don't matter, and she knows it. I think at this point, something dawned on me. These conversations that we were hearing, they're definitely pretentious, but I don't think I was watching a pretentious film. I think I was watching a film about pretension itself. To better explain my point, let's look at the dictionary definition of pretentious, which means attempting to impress by affecting greater importance, talent, culture than is actually possessed. Does that remind you of anyone in this film? The opening credit scene is the equivalent of telling us that just because the lead actress and director are often credited first, they are not automatically more important than everyone else. Similarly, while a conductor is front stage and center during an orchestral performance, their success also hinges on everyone else playing their part and doing their job. So taking it back to that initial interview, when asked about the role conductors play and whether or not they're glorified timekeepers, Lydia's response that conductors know the music even better at times than the composer who wrote that music, that they're the ones largely responsible for the creation of the soul of the music, it's all a load of narcissistic baloney. Now, I have no doubt that music conductors have a very difficult role to play, and it's much more than simply keeping time, but Lydia thinks that she's better and more important than everyone else, and as the movie goes on, it becomes clear that this is the main plot point. Over time, this pretentious tone diminishes as we move away from the original plot of a conductor trying to be the first one to conduct all of Mahler's symphonies and get to the real meat of this film, which is a character study on a narcissistic and toxic person abusing their power and control over others. Now, I won't spoil most of the events of this film, but I will be spoiling the ending, so if you'd like to skip that, please go ahead and skip to this timestamp. Anyway, towards the end of the film, Lydia's rampant abuse of power catches up to her, and she loses everything. Her wife leaves her, she's separated from her child, she gets fired from the role as conductor of the Berlin Orchestra, and goes back to her New York home to lie low for a while. While in her New York home, she runs into her brother Tony, a true born and raised New Yorker, and we learn that Lydia's real name isn't Lydia Tarr, but it's actually Linda Tarr, and he admonishes her, saying that she doesn't know where the hell she came from or where she's going. Well, where she does end up going after this is the Philippines. Presumably not being able to find a job in Europe or in the States, she conducts for a noticeably smaller budget orchestra in the Philippines, and as some of the screens are lowered behind the performers and the camera pans away, we realize that she's performing the Monster Hunter score to a group of cosplayers at what's most likely an anime convention. Cut away then to the end credits, where instead of tribal folk music, we hear this trap song, Barbarian by Basomorph. It's the kind of thing you'd find on YouTube under one of those EDM channels, and in fact, I can find it under this channel, Bass Nation. So at this point, we've completely swung the other way around. It's almost like the film is giving a middle finger to itself. Truly, they had us in the first half, not gonna lie, kind of moment. So there we are. Tar is a character study of a narcissist who thinks she's superior to everyone else and suffers the downsides to this mentality when it all comes crashing down on her. It's also about a lot of other things, such as ideas on separating art from the artist, the politics of the music world and how that overlaps with gender, a critique on cancel culture, and many more things that I didn't quite have time to dive deep into this video about. This movie really played on my expectations, making me expect it to be an over-serious and self-indulgent Oscar bait film. And I think this quote from Martin Scorsese about the film's director Todd Field might summarize it best. He said, "For so long now, many of us see films that pretty much let us know where they're going, and what you've done, Todd, is the very fabric of the movie you've created doesn't allow for this." Similarly, Paul Thomas Anderson called this film an art film, but it's art that's not fussy or pretentious, just razor sharp, pitch black, and hilarious. A very focused mirror held up to some of the worst of our human behaviors. And I know this isn't really a movie review video, but hey, while we're here, let me just mention that I thought this film was a 10 out of 10 for me, for many of the same reasons Paul Thomas Anderson listed. I think it's funny, dark, serious when it has to be, and a gripping character study from Cate Blanchett. Most films tell you exactly what the film is all going to be about in the first 30 minutes, but this film really plays with and subverts that idea. It's probably the first ever film that I've given a 10 out of 10 on that I actually gave up and walked away from the first time around. If you got the chance to see this film, please let me know what you thought about it in the comments, and please subscribe if you want to see more movie reviews and analysis like this.